I'm so glad to be here tonight. I had to bring my big water bottle because I'm getting a little cold or a little cold or something, a summer cold, but also, I got to stay hydrated in this heat. And I have to say before I start, I am a proud graduate of Howard University, the Mecca. And I have loved Toni Morrison since I was in high school and read Song of Solomon. Like, she has been my favorite author. She helped me to know, what you can do with words. And I did not know words could be so incredible, so lyrical, but also so true to home and to people I know and see and to my life. And so I just love Toni Morrison so much. I love Howard so much. So when they asked me to do this, I said, I have to. I can't, I don't want to be anywhere else. And this book, I have to say, I read a lot for work. I've always got to read. This book is a beautifully written book. I don't say that lightly. This book is beautifully written. It's so accessible. It's such a fun read. I was reading it because sometimes you say yes to something, you're like, I don't, you get it, you're like, okay, this okay. But when you get it and you're like, oh, I really like this. This is wonderful. I'm so honored to be, talking to Dana tonight. I'm so honored.
Thank you.
Let me start off by asking you, because it's a little different, but I want to ask you, because the book is so beautifully written, who was your editor for this book? And how was it, what was the editing process for you with this book?
That is a wonderful question. And before I answer it, and I hope I remember, I have to say thank you so much, Aisha. I appreciate your work. I've already told Aisha, everybody. Bill and I know where we are on the clock on our way to Metropolitan on Sunday based on where, if Aisha says it's time to play the puzzle, we're like, hurry up. It's time to, he's usually telling me to hurry up because he's usually on time. This is true. So we're big fans. So when Ryan said that Aisha agreed to be my conversation partner here, he knows, and I don't fangirl behind anybody. I'm hardcore. I said, Aisha's doing MLK. And he was like, Aisha Roscoe? I was like, yeah. He was like, good. So thank you so much. With all that you do, and as busy as you are, to pause. And then I also, because Aisha was a student at Howard when I was and I'm still, of course, on faculty at Howard, but we're so Howard proud of Aisha. I was telling my nephew in the car, she was White House correspondent, for those of you who don't know. Those of you who aren't already subscribers, handle up on that. Aisha's all the things. So thank you so much for being here. So my editor for this book is Abby West, who is at Amistad. It was incredibly important to me that this book be at a Black imprint. So HarperCollins is the larger publisher, but Amistad is the oldest Black imprint in mainstream publishing. So really, I really wanted to do it there for all of the reasons that the book talks about, how hard it is to be Black, to be a person of color in the field, which is what this book is really about. Toni Morrison is editor in that way. But Tracy Sherrod actually acquired the book when she was at Amistad. But Tracy left Amistad to go to Little Brown. And then for a short period, and this is important, I'm saying it for the record, Jim Baker was the editor for the book. And then Daniela Wexler was the editor for the book. Part of that is because it took me a long time, but also because publishing is so volatile. And Black people in publishing, so incredibly volatile. There was really a period when I thought I would have to rethink whether or not I could achieve what I wanted to achieve at a Black imprint if they couldn't keep Black editors. And then I ultimately did have a Black woman editor. So, and Abby was wonderful. And then the editorial assistant for the book, another Howard grad who was an English summa cum laude major, who said, I remember in freshman seminar, you said you worked on publishing. I want to do publishing. I said, okay, send me your information. Full circle moment. She ends up being the editorial assistant for the book for a gig that I recommended her for. So it's really cool.
Wow.
It's really cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so I think the obvious question to start off with is like, why focus on Toni Morrison as an editor? We know that she is a literary giant, an icon. What does her role, her time as an editor tell us about the icon?
So many things. I mean, I remember the first time I realized that she was an editor, and there was a certain level of naivete there for me in terms of what that meant. I knew books came from somewhere, and I knew somebody worked on them, and somebody acquired them and made them happen, but I wasn't exactly sure what that full process was like. I was in a graduate seminar with Eleanor Traylor, and she said, we're doing Toni Cade Bambara, Gail Jones, Leon Forrest, Henry Dumas. And I said, okay, like, help us to understand why these authors in particular. All great authors, but what made you pull them together this way? She's like, these are the fiction writers Toni Morrison edited at Random House. And I said, she was an editor, like, so these books come into being because she acquired them as an editor and they were the authors. And she said, yes, and there were others. So my initial intent was to focus on the fiction and to include Morrison in that conversation. At the point where I started, the first time that I mentioned the book or the idea for the book to Toni Morrison was at the Leon Forrest lecture. I had just finished a book on Leon Forrest, who very few people know, and the way that I would get them to know Leon Forrest, who was this beautiful Chicago writer, a really important Chicago writer, is they would say, who's Leon Forrest? And I would say, okay, Toni Morrison, what is his editor? And then they would go, oh. Okay. So I realized like that was an entry point. Yeah. She was doing the Leon Forrest lecture at Northwestern shortly after he had transitioned. And we were talking about it. And I think really, it's like that moment where your people tell you like experience will like make all of the difference, where if you are excellent with your content and you own it, then like doors open for you. And so because I really knew what I was talking about, and very few people really got down with Leon Forrest like that, like as a scholar, she looked like, so tell me more. And the more we talked, and she said, sit down. So we sit and we start talking. And I said, this was this class that Dr. Traylor had done. And she and Dr. Traylor, just as some context, are buddies. Like their running joke is we were girls together. So part of what we were able to do, even in that conversation, was to say, like, I was doing we had this class where we were looking at the writers that you edited, and she just lit up. She says, nobody talks about the editorship. And I said, well, I think it's important to think about. Yeah. And at some point, I would like to really talk about the editorship, not just about the discrete writers. And she said, if I can help in any way, let me know. Wow. And at that point, you go. Yeah. You put your foot on the gas. And that's really how it started. Our first interview, I'm talking to her, I have like my questions written out.
And when was this? When was this first interview?
All right, this is low-key shade. I just want y'all to know.
I want to show the work, work.
I know. I'm just playing. 2005.
2005, yes.
So it took almost 20 years to finish. And I'm joking about the shade because we talked about it in the green room, and I was like, I'm shamed, yes. But it needed to happen this way. I trust the universe in that way. So I, got all my questions written down. I'm ready. I'm like sitting. I'm like, all right, let's go. And I'm asking her about these authors, these editors in particular. She's talking about everybody except for what I want to talk about. And there is just no way. There's no way to be like, ma'am, I need you to stay focused. Yeah. I need you to talk about what I want to talk about. And she said, oh, don't worry. We'll talk about it a little bit more later. So second interview. I get through a little bit, and she's giving me like one-word answers as I'm asking her about the writers themselves. Yeah. And she's talking about the other stuff. And what I didn't realize that someone told me after the fact, oh, she was editing you like in real time by saying, this thing has to be more expansive than just these fiction writers.
The focus needs to be bigger.
Yeah, yes. you want to talk about the fiction writers, but I edited more than 50 books. So at that point, we kind of collaborate, and I start saying, here are the books that I have on my list. What are the books that are on your list? So we come up with a cumulative list so that then we can look back and see and say, all right, if we're going to talk about all of these books, how do we do this a little bit differently? Yeah.
Well, how was it to be talking to her, interacting with her? Because even as I'm writing the questions out, I'm like, okay, do I call her Morrison, Professor Morrison, Dr. Morrison? How, like, I can't call her Tony, that's too familiar. Like, so how did you interact with her? Like, what was she like as a person?
As large in life as one would imagine. So I was still like a little bit reserved.
Yeah.
The best conversations were actually those that were more informal. And again, because I had the benefit of like Dr. Traylor's, you can trust her.
Yeah.
Then there was a little more relaxation on her part, but I was still definitely Miss Morrison, like what? And I was still not pushing, but also I got just enough Southern grit
Yeah.
to be like, ma'am, no.
Yeah.
Like quietly.
Yes.
And when we were talking about the title, we had talked a lot about titles and how difficult titles are and how difficult titles can be. I go up and I tell her that I got the title, I'm ready to go, and I say, the house that Tony built at random. And she says, too long, but Tony at random. And I thought, all right, great title. And then I say, but can I say Tony?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And she says, well, no one would know who Chloe was. Like very casually. So
Yes.
I said, all right, so you're giving me permission at this moment. And she's just like, she was like, I'm over this thing that you can't call me by my name.
Yes.
But I still said Miss Morrison.
Miss Morrison. No, I feel you. And I mean, and that gets into something, and I wanted to, that I do want to talk about, is the fact that in this book, we kind of get the idea of Toni Morrison not just as this artist, creative, but also someone who was very cognizant of what sells, right? She was committed to telling the stories of the Black experience and of Black people, and to not, being yielding to the white gaze. But she also was like, we have to sell these books. And like, what can we learn from that?
That you have to pay attention to your profit loss statement. If you want to do something that may or may not sell well, you better make sure you're doing something that sells extremely well so that you can get away with the other thing that you want to do. That's part of it. Leon Forrest, again, was a beautiful writer whose work she admired, but Leon Forrest never, in that first edition, never sold more than 1,000 books. So she had to make sure, all right, I got to do this to make sure that I can do this. So I think that's part of it. Her commitment, and I hope that we can get back to it. People will ask, like, what do I hope is like some result of the book, if you will. I hope that we can get back to the moment where we do prioritize the literary. Because the literary is as much at stake as art in a general sense. I don't know that we will ever get to a point where we aren't selling and publishing books, but we will probably get to a point sooner than later, if we aren't paying attention, where we are publishing only mediocre books.
And so when you say the literary, what are you saying? The way that Toni Morrison was looking at the beauty of the writing, the importance of the writing, was the writing challenging something? She was looking at more than just, is this something that people will buy? Is that what you mean by the literary?
Absolutely.
Yes.
So, and Bill will tell you, anybody will tell you, my sister, like, I read as much beach literature as anybody in the world.
Yeah.
I have already finished Highland Beach. I finished Sag Harbor. I finished, like, I'm down with Sunny Holston.
Yes.
Because I need the beach read.
Yes, yeah.
But then there are books that I teach. And the way that I've bifurcated, it's kind of snotty, but it's real. Like, if it's on my iPad or my Kindle, it's a quick read for me.
It's a quick read, yeah.
But if it's something that I'm going to teach, and Beauty's laughing because she understands as a fellow African-American literature professor, there are books that you will have that are timeless, they're universal, you learn something about yourself morally, philosophically. They're just done with a certain level of gravitas, if you will. Yeah.
And that stay with you in a different way.
Absolutely.
That stay with you in a different way and can change you.
Yes.
Can change you.
Oh, you did that better than I did.
Yeah, no. They can change you. The book starts off with Toni Morrison speaking at the Second National Conference of Afro-American Writers. And she's making the argument that for Black writers and Black books to succeed, basically she's saying we need each other. Look, the book is all noted up, but I'm gonna kind of go to what she says. She essentially says, and this is very early on in the book, is that the survival of Black publishing, which to me is sort of a way of saying the survival of Black writing, will depend on the same things that the survival of Black anything depends on, she stated, which is the energies of Black people, sheer energy, inventiveness and innovation, tenacity, the ability to hang on, and the contempt for those huge monolithic institutions and agencies which do obstruct us. In other words, we must do our work.
That's right.
And I mean, you know, and this is just her talking. I mean, but what do you think that means? What does it mean to do our work? Because I guess I'm going now into not just literature as a whole, but Black literature, Black publishing, Black books. What does it mean to do our work?
So the title of the opening chapter, and it was really important for me to situate and to ground the chapter in a Black space, and it happened to have been Howard, where she's on this panel talking about publishing, but the title of the chapter is We All We Got. Intentionally so, because her point was Black music ain't dying, because we buy Black music.
Yeah.
And we have, and the bigger point she made in the remarks, and this was in a Q&A session, is we don't put up with bad Black music.
No.
We don't put up with bad Black fill in the blank.
Yes.
So part of her point was we have an expectation of excellence and we meet it. If we continue to meet it as consumers, it can be produced. Where it got a little bit tricky is where we weren't the main consumers of our art. We were primary, but in terms of whether or not we were making the purchase. So her bigger point is if you buy the books, good books will continue to be published. So her other example was around detective fiction. She said if you publish 900 detective novels, Lakshmi, who works in detective and diagnosis, 900 of them will sell. So you have to build an audience in such a way that you demand that publishers give you what you want. And that was really how she came to compile the Black book, the book that she's most known for as an editor. And the Black book is in its 30th edition, maybe, an anniversary edition. But her reason for doing that was because she would go to sales conference, and the way that it works is a publisher has sales meeting twice a month, and you go and you say, here's the book that is on my list. Here are the places that I want you to sell it. And the salespeople said, we can't sell Black books across the street. And so she says, I'm gonna do a book that you can sell anywhere and make the point so we can end this once and for all. I'm tired of this conversation. So to prove that Black people are book buying public, and I think that that's really important to think about, and that transitions into any number of other sectors in the same way that people know Black women vote, like people know where people consume culture. So we are the ones who have to demand a certain kind of literature, because if we buy it, then they will produce it.
Well, you know, you go into when Toni Morrison first starts at Random House. She's a single mother, 2 young boys. I didn't realize, you know, you always hear that story. I didn't realize that her, you know, ex-husband wasn't like involved at all, and like she was kind of totally on her own. When she starts out at Random House, in a way, she was thinking about it as her stable job, as her way to pay her bills. That was interesting to me, that this was the way to pay her bills.
Yeah, and actually she stayed there until 1983. She had sold plenty of books. She had done The Bluest Eye, she'd done Sula, she'd done Beloved. I mean, she had written and was an established writer, but and she talked about this as growing up as a kid of the Depression. As a Depression kid, she's like, I need a check every 2 weeks. Like, these books are nice. I think this is going to work out for me, but I need a check. I need insurance. I need this. And it's only when her editor says, you're really a writer. Like, you really can stop.
Yes.
But for her, it was, this is my day job, if you will.
Yeah.
Didn't see a tremendous difference between writing and editing, and by then she's also teaching sometimes, because she saw it all as dealing with books and words and literature.
And she also obviously believed in, this is in the 70s and 80s. She's coming up in a time where she's seeing the activism, and there's a point in the book where it's like, yes, it would have been nice to be in the streets, but there had to be a record. Yeah. And so what does that mean, or how was she looking at this when she was thinking there must be a record?
Yeah. So Angela Davis, I think, is a good example. She contracts Angela Davis less than 3 months after Angela Davis gets out of jail. And Angela Davis is adamant that she doesn't want to write a book. She's like, I'm not even 35 years old. I don't really have anything to say. But part of what makes for good editing is anticipating what the reading audience needs. So as the trial is going on, Morrison is working back channels, unbeknownst to her publisher, too, to some degree, that would make it possible for her to get, at the very least, a shot at Angela Davis. And somebody needed to tell the story the way that Angela Davis wanted the story to be told, where it was really a continuation of the activism, not a tell-all about who was sleeping with whom or why the Black Panther Party fell apart in one city. So that was a part of the record. Another example is she publishes, a white Yale law professor writes this book called The Case for Black Reparations. James Foreman, just to give you a little bit of the backstory, had gone to Riverside Church, taken over the pulpit, and demanded reparations on behalf of Black people. In the news everywhere. People were talking about it, thinking about it, except they were critical of his tactics. Imagine Penn. I spent a whole lot of time in MLK Library as a graduate student, so I'm here for all of the things. But imagine somebody rolling in here now, just straight up, coming, getting the mic from us and saying, we demand whatever, whatever. Don't nobody try that, because we gangster.
Yeah, exactly.
But imagine somebody doing that. That's what Foreman does at Riverside. Everybody thinks that the people who are on his side think that he's right, but there's enough of an edge there that it gets lost. So when Boris Bitker, again, Yale professor, who has said, there is a legal argument for reparations. She said, this has to be a part of the record. And they agree. We got to take this reparations conversation out of the fringe and bring it into the mainstream and make the argument. They end up arguing about the title.
Yes, yeah.
Because he wants to call it the second American dilemma. She's like, no, we're going to call this the case for Black reparations. Yes, and he's like, no, but I'm not actually making the case. I'm just laying out what the parameters are. Now we're going to call this the case for Black reparations. But then she goes to sales conference. And this is the interesting, really kind of fun part where you never know whether it's true or not. She tells him, listen, when I went to sales conference, I didn't even say anything about the reservations that I had about that title. They just said no. So what they want to go with is, here are one or two options. Here's what we're going to go with. And he pushes back until finally, back to the prophet-in-law. She's like, do you want this book to sell or not? Do you want people to pick this book up or not? And if your goal is to bring this conversation, her language in the letter to him was, if you're going to bring this out of the ghetto, because literally, you can say if you don't want this to be fringe, but if you want to say you want to bring this conversation out of its ghetto of this is a crazy radical Black thing into mainstream, we got to deal with this face on. And eventually she convinces him. Yeah. Whether it was willing or not, we don't know.
We don't know. But how ahead of her time and ahead of, to read about the case for reparations that was made back then, and it's not until the 2000s where we have Ta-Nehisi Coates once again making the case for reparations. So much of what she was doing and pushing was against the status quo, was questioning and challenging, and it was ahead of its time. It was before people were even ready to have the conversation.
Yeah, and that's, I think, again, what makes for a good editor, being able to anticipate, and then having, to some degree, she had a certain level of gravitas that was available to her because she was a writer, that other people did not. She also had the benefit of being at Random House because at, let's say, Doubleday, and I learned this from Marie Day, who is an incredible publisher, who was an incredible editor herself, but I'm thinking about Marie Day because I'm looking at my Metropolitan family. Marie Brown.
Yes.
Y'all like, oh, Marie Day? No, Marie Brown,
Yes.
who was at Doubleday, who said, everywhere else, every other house, you had to take it to a committee. Imagine, you're the only black editor in the room. You got to take it to a committee of 12. And everybody's like, not feeling it. No.
Yeah,
So you get the pay by
the
numbers.
reasons are like,
Yeah.
I don't know about that.
Yes. At Random House, the editor just had to convince the editor-in-chief, this is a book I want, this is how I intend to pitch it, this is how I think it's gonna do, here's my profit and loss statement, and the editor-in-chief says, okay. And we also know that there was something special about Morrison, and we know there was something special about her, like in a general sense. I don't have the language for it, but as a way of telling the story, she was at L.W. Singer, a small textbook company in Syracuse. At some point, the executives from there go to L.W. Singer because they have bought L.W. Singer, and they're making decisions about who's going to make it to Random House. We don't know why she gets chosen. He had experienced her for less than 30, 45 minutes. But there was something about her presence and her awareness that made them say, all right, we're gonna bring her over here. So that same kind of energy made it possible for her to go directly to her editor-in-chief and say, I want this book and this is how we're going to do it. The other thing is anticipating Muhammad Ali's book. We know Muhammad Ali is very popular, but at the time that she acquires the book, Muhammad Ali is not the most popular person in the public imagination because he has said he will not go to war. His license to box has been revoked. And she's still like, yeah, we're gonna continue to work on this. Now, Charles Harris, who was an editor at Random House before she acquired the book, but she picks it up even though they were like ready to cut their losses. Because Muhammad Ali took almost as long to finish his book as I did to finish this one. So they were like, we're just gonna cut the losses because he then gets his license to box again. He didn't think about writing no book no more. So she's having to like really, really get his writer on board and to try to get him to stay focused. All because she can anticipate whether something is too radical or it's something that's going to work out really well. He ends up winning the championship back. And within months, the book had no finished chapters. She gets Richard Durham, who's his writer, to come to New York, and for a month they work on nothing but this book because this book's got to be out while everybody is talking about Muhammad Ali, and they sell 100,000 copies like in weeks.
Yeah, amazing. But as an editor, we talked a little bit about how she would push back on her writers, and I love this thing. Where she, let me see where, I gotta look at this. I love this, how she stood up for herself when she was editing George Ainsworth Land, and he was pushing back on her edits. And I said, I have to use this for myself. She basically says to him, I cannot be strong-armed. It is simply an ineffective tactic because it makes me angry and uncooperative. Yeah. And I feel like I need to say that. Yes. It makes me angry and uncooperative. So don't try it. Don't try it.
She had to have relationships with the authors. Yeah. Some authors were a little more cooperative than others. And there were points when I was in the archive and I'm like dying laughing. I'm like, I'm done for the day. I'm done. Like, and in a moment like that, she's like, I can't be strong-armed.
No.
It makes me angry and uncooperative. Like, just stop.
Just stop. Well, and I wonder, like, will we have, like, books like this in the future about editors? I mean, you're never going to have another Toni Morrison, but because we don't have letters anymore. We have emails and text messages. Is anyone saving them? Will there be an ability to have a record like this?
That's going to be tough. We talked about this a little bit last week at the Schomburg Centennial Festival, and I was on a panel with other editors. So Chris Jackson, who has an imprint and is Ta-Nehisi Coates' editor, for instance. And Jen Baker was there, who's editing again, Abby as my editor, and then Yadon Israel, who is at Simon & Schuster. And part of what they said was, after reading the book, they would have to think about keeping their own records differently. Because what Yadon has been incredibly kind about the book, even as a Simon & Schuster editor, in saying, this is the invisible labor that we do that nobody captures. And if we aren't keeping a record of it, how do we even know that? Especially if we don't have access to emails. Like, what do we make decisions about printing and putting in? And everything is edited, because as much as is here, I cut, what, about 20, how many? About at least 17,000, no. I think I had to, I think the cut was like, you need to cut 15,000 words, because I was way over. And there was one chapter that I was holding on to for dear life, and I got everything down. And that chapter was 9,075 words. And I was like 9,075 words over. And I was like, okay, universe. This chapter, which like
What
really
was it
challenged
about?
me. Thank you for asking.
Yes.
Because I want to talk about that chapter. Toni Morrison had written this piece in the New York Times, What the Black Woman Thinks About Women's Lib. After that, she's fully aware that white feminists control the publishing industry because they make decisions about who buys, what gets added to syllabi. I mean, she told me repeatedly, and I was like, I know, and I don't really believe you, but I know, that she was like, The Bluest Side didn't do well. It was only when they adopted it in the CUNY system and so on. So she was aware that system. So that book, that chapter was about her effort to edit books by white women very specifically. So she had done a book called America's Working Women that focused on the legacy of women in America in different types of jobs, where she was clear that Black women had always been America's working women.
Yeah.
So that this book should be like White America or like America's Working White Women or something, but she still does it. She had a book on the list that was in that chapter called The Lesbian Myth, where there was this attempt to debunk lesbianism because feminism and lesbianism had been tied so closely together. And then there was a book about legalism and how it affects you. And for that, she was working with what does NOW stand for? The National Organization of Women. So really thinking about how she was navigating publishing white feminism at a moment where Black feminism and white feminism were at war.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a good
It should land
chapter.
somewhere.
That's a good chapter.
That's what I said. But again, when it's 9,070, it was almost to the letter. And I had like gone through because somehow I thought like I had enough and these ors that I could cut 12,000 of them.
Get them, just a little extra,
No, that got me down like 3,000. And then this big one. So, and it was also important because I could lift the whole thing out, and I will probably try to place it somewhere in its full form.
Somewhere. Well, I know we have to get to questions, but I want to ask you just before we get to the questions, what do you think was Toni Morrison's favorite work as an editor? Did she have a favorite?
Oh, I don't know that it was the favorite, but it was certainly the first one she talked to me about, like very intentionally. She reached behind her shelf and she pulls out this book and she says, "Isn't this book beautiful?" And I say, "Yes." And she's like, "Do you know this book?" And I'm like, "Damn it, no." I said, "No." And so she hands it to me for me to flip through, and it was contemporary African literature. I think it was a book that she was incredibly proud of because it was an anthology. It exposed her to writers she had not been exposed to otherwise. And she was also, at the time, really trying to think about diaspora, trying to think about beyond African-American literature, to think about Caribbean literature, to think about African literature. I know she thought Gail Jones was an incredible writer, and she was deeply hurt by the severed relationship between her and Gail Jones. Jones was a recluse for the most part, very quiet. They had a wonderful working relationship. And And basically, Toni Morrison acted as her editor and as her agent. She then marries, and after having done 3 books with Gail Jones's husband sends Toni Morrison a letter saying, "Can you send me a sample of your work as an editor?" And that was one of those,
Yeah.
I can't be strong-armed.
No,
Peace, bro.
yes, yeah.
So she
yeah.
tries to intervene as best as she possibly can, but she cannot because at that point she knows she's essentially lost the confidence of Jones because
Yes.
of this influence.
Yeah.
But she, I think, was very proud of having published Gail Jones. And a number of writers. So she was also very clear. She said, "Listen, I didn't like all those books."
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, you got to tell me which ones." She said, "I'm not going to tell you which ones, but I ain't like all of them. Some of them, just a job." Yeah.
Okay, so I know we can have questions. So let's get started. We got one right there. We're gonna pass the mic to you.
Of those things you removed from the book, which edit do you think you should have fought more for?
Probably, that's a great question. Probably what, but I snuck it in anyway. Probably what was a preface of sorts. So I had an extended piece. I'm an old soul, so Margaret Walker wrote this book, How I Wrote Jubilee. She did it in a whole book. I had an essay that I wanted to open with How I Wrote Toni at Random, because I thought it was incredibly important to be transparent, like how you do this work, because I had to figure it out. There is no class on writing literary biography. There's no class on figuring out how to go through 3,000 boxes in an archive and crafting a story out of them. You figure it out as you're going. So I wanted to say very clearly how I did it. And it was one of the chapters that had to go. And so I hope that it'll show up in the classroom somewhere or in the different interviews that I do. But I drew the line in a couple of places. I was like, I'm not cutting Leon Forrest, I'm not cutting Henry Dumas, and I'm not cutting Toni K. Bambara. Everything else is negotiable. And I had beautiful editorial team that they said, you're gonna be negotiating with yourself because we need this to come back with this number of pages or with this number of words. Like we can't make those cuts. This is up to you. So it was really a negotiation with myself.
Another question? Okay, yes. Don't be shy.
I'm not shy. You've talked about like the trends in publishing and like I would say the sway towards mediocrity. What have you seen like just through researching this for 20, 25 years and like the trends shifting from like her publishing all these Black women in the 80s and 90s to like the kind of drop in Black women authorship in the early 2000s to like this current uprise of Black people writing good books, but for white audiences. Whereas in the 70s and 80s, Toni Morrison says she's not writing for the white gaze.
Yeah, I think part of it is contextual. The 1960s and 70s, we saw a social movement in the US in a general sense. It was, Black is beautiful. But you also had Black publishers. What the mainstream houses were clear about were these Black publishers were selling books. So then they tried to figure out, how can we have books that people will buy? Third World Press, Black Classic in Baltimore. You can talk about Broadside Press, like all of these Black presses in major cities, Detroit, Baltimore, Amos Zoo Bolton, even in DC. So once mainstream folks started paying attention and saying, hey, these books are selling, how can we then become the people who produce that? That's what made that kind of moment even possible. both Morrison, and I think in some ways, Charles Harris, who deserves his own book, and who I talked to a lot about this book and helped me to think about structuring it. Charles Harris had done a lot of that work that made it that much easier, I think, for Morrison to be able to do it. There isn't a clear path in that way. And I mention Harris now because Harris had gone through a program that taught publishers everything about book publishing, from the economics to the marketing, like a full range. And he eventually left Random House, came to Howard, and started the Publishing Institute at Howard because he knew that you needed to know from start to finish how to make it work. Once that kind of thing dissipates and RCM takes over everything, like a major conglomerate takes over everything, and the notion of publishing books that are good for good book's sake is over. It's all bottom line because now a corporate entity owns everything. Again, the book buying public has some authority because there was also a period when every author who got a major contract who was a Black woman was also not African American. And great books. I love Chimamanda Adichie. I love Yaa Gyasi. But part of the thing that was happening with the domestic women was like, yo, if we're not international, we're not exotic enough. So we have to make sure that we are not falling into that, here's the niche, here's the moment where you're checking boxes. And the 80s with Terry McMillan made it very clear that it was possible. Like you could sell the books, but what became problematic about that was the kind of formula. So that somebody would have a book and people would say, no, that's a book that I'm saving for somebody else. So you got to move out of formula. A big part of it is going to be paying attention to small houses that do beautiful, beautiful books and buying those. Because there are great books out there. The challenge is, do you get to know what they are? Like, how do you find them? If you're not at an independent bookstore where you know your bookseller and you know the person who's making recommendations, and that person says, oh, you got to pick up so-and-so and so-and-so because this is a great book. If it doesn't get reviewed in the Times, if it doesn't get reviewed in the Post, if it doesn't, it's just so hard to know that there are great books that are out there. But they're out there.
Yes. My question is related to this, extends, hey neighbor, extends on some of what this wonderful question has brought up. I wanted to know if you could elaborate on this concept of building the audience and what some of those tactics might be, and if that's different now than it was then, if that's relevant.
I would say the formula is pretty close to the same. So one of the things that I left out when I was answering Emma's question was about book clubs and magazines. Essence ruled in the 80s.
Yeah.
Like if it was in Essence and Essence told you to read it, we got it.
Yeah.
But what happens when Essence gets bought and Essence is online only, or Essence doesn't care. Essence does care about Black books, but not as, you know what I mean? Like what happens when they're not really doing the grunt work of like really going through so many books to tell you these are the ones that we are recommending. So I think book clubs, like getting back to the book club moment and getting back to the magazine moment where we're owning our own stuff and controlling our own voice, I think is just like, there's just no substitute for it. Like, how do we do it? Like, how do we make our own decisions about what to teach? Because textbooks still rule. Like when books get adopted, particularly literary books get adopted, sales go up, scholarship around it goes up, more people are talking about it, and they do become like completely accessible to people. Like Toni Morrison's not an easy read,
No.
but people love and know Toni Morrison, which means that level of excellence that we see there, we can see in other places, and we can build audience in that way. Use social media for good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Another question? Any further questions? Oh, yeah, here we go, over here.
First of all, I can't wait to read this. I did not know, I knew you were writing a book, but I didn't know what it was about. And that you're honoring Charles Harris and having his story told to people who don't even, Charles Harris founded Amistad, and as you said, you know, Howard University Press. So thank you for that. I can't wait to read it. Do you think it's possible in a digital world? You talked a lot about P&L statements and the whole publishing business, which is a big deal because Charles and I were trying to buy BET books, but we lost out to Harlequin because they could publish the books for 8 cents. Yep. And so is it possible in the digital world, you think, for us to have and own our own platforms and sort of recapture what you're talking about that we had some time ago?
Yep. I think so. I think it's value orientation. And being in this space with this black bookseller is a testament to that. Yep. It would have been easy. Like, at a certain point, they got sick of me, but at another point, they were like, okay, we get it. We know it. I was like, nah, we're going to need to do this differently. Like, no, we're going to the library. They're like, well, you know, a great bookstore. I'm like, nah. They're, well, we don't have a bookstore that can come here. Mahogany can go with MLK. This is what we're going to do. This is why we're going to do this. And this is why. So we also have to say, it's hard. It's hard. I know it's hard. But that difference between that book that's on sale somewhere else and that book that's at Mahogany for $6 more, if you go to Mahogany and you spend that extra $6, Mahogany gets to stay open, Mahogany gets to read and tell us and have events and so on. So I do think it's possible, but we have to have the value orientation where we're saying, I'm gonna go to that place, I'm gonna order online. We were talking about this in the green room, and I was like, well, everybody who's asking me, how do I get a copy if there isn't a reading in their city, I'm saying order from Mahogany. If you don't order from HarperCollins Amistad, because it's also important for Amistad to get shine. Because Amistad is an imprint of HarperCollins. So for me, I'm like, yo, Abby, this is what we about to do. We about to let you do whatever it is that you want to do. I hope that this book does well. For me, yes, for Toni Morrison, for this, but I also want Amistad to do well. And I want like all of the things that, to make it a point that we can control our spaces in positive ways and not just control for control's sake. So I think it's possible. Yeah.
Okay, here we got another question. We probably got time for like one more. I see we're coming up on the close. Okay, so we'll get one more before we go. Oh, wait. Oh, then you're going to go to him next? Okay, you go to him next. Okay. Yes. So you go.
Thank you so much for your work. Quick question. For young Black female writers, what would get your, I think more, I'm in the process of starting to look for literary agents, and I have no idea of any of it, just from what I've Googled. What would you say would get like literary agents' attention, and especially like a bigger publishing house, particularly if your work is about Black women?
Yes. I appreciate this in ways that you have no idea, because as we were talking about audiences for the book, I kept saying, I think this is a audience for writers as well. Because writers are thinking, like, if I just write a great piece, somehow it'll land well. It won't. You have to like do all of the other stuff. You gotta think about like who your agent is, you gotta think about the cover, you gotta think about the title, you gotta make all kinds of choices. And so making that transparent to people was also very important to me, because publishing is an incredibly insular space. It literally is a who you know kind of moment, and not quite in a, I want to say not in an obnoxious way. Like, you know, like sometimes like DC's a who you know kind of town.
Yeah.
Not quite that bad, but almost.
But almost, yeah.
In the publishing industry, and I'll tell you really quickly why I think this is the case. So the industry started with, there's no euphemistic way to say it, so I'll say like there's a break in the 40s, late 30s, 40s, where the guys who are working at mainstream houses are Jewish, and white men won't hire them. So they decide, Marita, we're gonna do our own thing. This will never happen to us again. So they build their own houses. And then they begin to control the industry. So the insular experience of it is we don't want to keep people out who have talent just because they don't have our last name, or because they didn't marry into my family, or they didn't have friends who. So trying to find ways to expand it was why I thought, or the transparency of it was also why I thought it was important to writers. So, agent, you want to pay attention to books that you really like that resonate with you. Go straight to the acknowledgments. See who the editor is. Make a list. At the point where the editor's name keeps coming up, that's part of your goal. All right, this is somebody who gets what I'm doing, and this is the kind of stuff they do. At which point, you start looking at their list, and you say, now, what agents do they work with? And then you say, all right, if they're working with Writers House, they're working with Serendipity, okay. Now I go to their webpage, and I see who at Serendipity is taking new books. Because everybody in Serendipity ain't taking new books. And so you're having to do that research. And again, you're thinking, all I gotta do is write a good book. No, you gotta do a lot of research to figure out, like, on the backside. And then there are spaces, I think, where you can go where it's open, where you get to meet a bunch of different people, where it's worth the squeeze to go to spaces where agents are taking pitches. So be clear about what it is that you're doing. But the biggest thing is to pay attention to who's doing what you admire and follow those breadcrumbs. Yep. Publishers Weekly, get a subscription. Just because they're gonna that's where you're gonna see a lot of, the information is out there, but if you don't even know to go to look there, it may as well not be.
Okay, here you go.
Firstly, congratulations on the release of this book. I know how hard you worked and how many hours and sacrifice you put into it.
Thanks, Kit.
Would you, circling back to those chapters and some of the things that didn't make it to the final release, would you ever consider publishing those in the form of another book, or maybe an article or a video essay of some sort? Because I do believe that those stories need to be told, and it's extremely important.
Thank you. I do want to place the whole chapter that was left out. The bits and pieces I'm trying to sneak in here and there. I did an excerpt for Poets and Writers, the magazine, and was able to sneak some stuff in there. Did a piece for Slate. Yes, Billy, Slate. Because I kept saying Slade. He's like, Slate, girl. And I was like, I don't know why I'm doing this. For Slate. And I'm supposed to do something for Airmail. So Airmail, I think that there are places that I can try to find somewhere to put them. And young people like you are taking me kicking and screaming into social media. So at some point, now the irony here is this is my nephew who I tried to hire as my social media intern. So at some point he was gonna take me, and I was like, I don't like this. This doesn't feel right to me. And then the person who's working with me now kept saying, like, you're sending me stuff and you're not in the post. And I was like, so I'm supposed to be in every post? And she's like, yeah. So it just doesn't feel good to me. So I'm trying to get there. I'm trying to get there where I can do like some little, all right, here's what got left out and here's why. And here's some stuff so that some of it does become a part of the record. So thank you for the question.
Yes, yeah, get on TikTok and just set up the camera and just talk. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Please, round of applause. Everybody, get multiple copies. I love seeing people.